All right, chat. Sorry, I'm a little bit late getting to this. As you guys know, my grandmother passed, and then the following night, my air conditioning went out. So I've had a fun couple of days. But now we can finally sit down and talk about Lilith. So Lilith is a really interesting unit from a couple of perspectives. I think if you're just looking at her for raw damage, she has really good scalability. And if you're looking at her for sort of like multiple use potential and setup potential, she's also going to be good in that. Lilith is going to be the game's newest 5-star single target quick berserker coming to us with the second banner of Ordeal Call 4. And needless to say, people are pretty excited about her, and you can easily see why. Not only just her designs looking amazing, but also just in general, Lilith being a very high octane unit. I think what we're beginning to see here is another arms race with regards to the Berserkers, a race that maybe we had thought was won by Castoria Berserker at this point, that she was kind of standing sort of leaps and bounds ahead of the other Berserkers and maybe even some of the other single targets just in general due to her scalability. Now you have Lilith entering the arena and being like, bet. So a little bit, she is going to be another unit here that's going to stand toe-to-toe with Zertoria and offer that high value level in terms of kit and performance. And that's something that I think is both exciting, but also maybe a little bit worrisome, as Castoria was already enough of a problem as is from a balance perspective. Now we have Lilith joining the ranks here and really just absolutely causing some mayhem. So let's go ahead and let's talk about her overall kit here. So as we start to look at Lilith's proper kit, you can see she's got a whopping 12.7k attack. Now, Berserkers normally do have a pretty high attack value. This is definitely something that you would expect, but maybe not to this degree. This is definitely one of the higher attack powers in the entire game. It's a very, very good stat line for her. The downside is going to be her HP. She's anemic on the HP side. This is definitely a huge concern for a 5-star Berserker. This is a very, very low number, and it is troubling. But, you know, this is kind of par for the course whenever we see a high offensive unit. Now, Lilith is going to be an Earth attribute unit. She's only going to have 10-star absorption and 5-star generation. We kind of expect this. It's a Berserker. You're usually not going to be trafficking too much in the star department in that regard, but there's definitely stuff that you can do to help that out. Her NP charge attack rate's actually probably the biggest concern here. It's only 0.4%, and this is actually going to be one of the biggest things that keeps Lilith in check and holds her back. You see, a little bit, if the devs had actually allowed this number to flourish a little bit more, Lilith would be terrifying. Lilith would actually just probably be the game's best Berserker bar none at that point, and there really wouldn't be too much of a comparison. So this is going to be one of the main things that actually does kind of limit her capability, and we'll talk about that as we go through, but it's not like she's a lost cause by any stretch of the imagination due to this. She has the 0.5% MP charge defense that Berserkers like to have. Her death rate is 37.3%, so be careful if you're taking her into a death-prone fight. Her alignment is Chaotic Evil. She is a female gendered unit that has the basic traits of animal characteristics, demon, demonic, demonic beast, divine spirit, divinity, goddess servant, humanoid, immune to pigify, non-hominide servant, servant, 7-night servant, and weak to enemy elish. Needless to say, this girl has everything, so she's actually going to be really easy to kill if you ever have to go up against her. You will very easily be able to exploit several niches against her, including her all too common chaotic evil alignment here that allows people to really be able to exploit that for more damage. So she's definitely going to be a unit that when you're facing her, you'll probably have an easy laundry list of units to be able to use. But if you yourself are using her, you're going to have to watch out and make sure that you keep her protected, again, due to that rather anemic HP. looking at the deck, she's definitely a departure from what we would consider a conventional like Berserker deck. Usually Berserkers are very buster oriented. They typically have a triple buster deck, maybe double buster, double arts, you name it. Definitely an interesting thing in that regard. But as we see this, she's single buster, double arts, double quick. And she actually has really high hit counts on both her quick and her arts cards. And that is going to help the lower NP gain rate here a little bit. So the offset to that standard NP gain rate being so low is that they gave the hit counts a little bit of oomph on the cards to help out the performance there. So she will have decent card performance, but your issue is going to be her NP performance is going to be what will end up suffering a little bit. Now, as we look at the hit counts of the Buster and the extra attack, though, there's nothing bad about them. They're just average, so they're going to be serviceable, but again, nothing too much to write home about in that regard, unless you enhance them more. Looking at Lilith's active skills now, her first one is pretty interesting, as it's going to have a chance to charm one enemy for one turn, 150%. So this is enough that this should override just about every form of magic resistance in the game. So there's naturally going to be some units that are just going to be immune or have some sort of debuff immunity on them. So just watch out for that sort of thing. But as long as you can land the charm here, it's actually going to be super important to her, because very similar to, like, say, Summer Kama, you're going to have a capability to have super effective damage on your NP if you have charm on the enemy. That also means putting on any sort of command code that can confer charm, or anybody else even in the party that can give charm to an enemy, will actually benefit her very much. She's going to also then from there reduce their critical damage resistance down for 3 turns. So this means that she is going to get even more crit potential out of this and crit damage. Definitely a nice thing there with the 50% reduction. And she will also gain critical stars here, basically for 30. So obviously the star absorption is going to be pretty low on her, so the 30 star bomb is nice. This is going to make you want to use her alongside someone like, say, Summer Scotty, that can produce stars on demand for a quick unit. Therefore, you can kind of just overwhelm and flood the party to make sure that she gets enough that she needs. All of this on a 6-turn cooldown. Her second skill here grants quick and arts performance for 3 turns. Just standard double steroid here. So this is where having the double arts cards and double quick cards is going to help things out, because this means that basically 80% of her deck will be covered by this singular steroid. And it's 30% for each of them at the maximum rank, which is certainly nice. But this is also going to be where her all too important survivability will come in. She actually does get a 2 attack evasion here over 3 turns for basically being attached to the steroid. So there's a little bit of a like conundrum of, do I pop it for survivability? Do I pop it for when I need it for damage? The good news is, because of the multi-turn duration, it's going to be pretty easy. You could probably just pop it for damage and hope for the best. But definitely pay attention to your surroundings and make sure that you're not about to get nuked by the enemy, maybe like a turn after it would expire or something like that. So definitely an interesting skill here, and this is going to be something that will help keep her alive. Her third skill is Ignore Invincibility for 3 turns. I'm going to be honest, I actually feel like this part is a little bit overkill. They already gave her just about everything that she would need to function at a high value. Giving her Ignore Invincibility means you don't even have to take an Ignore Invincibility CE either. So it's just kind of getting rid of one of the few things she might need, or that somebody else might be able to outscale her at. So this is an interesting thing nonetheless, but I'm sure it's welcome people that like her here and really want to use her. So it's also going to increase her attack for 3 turns by 30% at maximum value. So again, nice steroid, basically paired here with the ability to invuln and pierce. So you're not going to really be able to stop Lilith too easily. And then she's also going to have a 50% charge skill here. Definitely welcome. This will allow her to function from 0 in a one-shot scenario easily. This will allow her to work pretty well into multiple damage dealer setups. And this can work in a scenario in which maybe you charge her and have her NP confer its traits to an enemy to set up somebody else as well. Though, frankly, with the amount of damage that Lilith does, you probably won't be doing that too often because you'll just be using Lilith at that point. She has a 500% chance, though, to reduce her own mental debuff resistance for 3 turns. This is going to be one of the ways that you can stop her, and that's sleep, charm, skill seal, basically terror, anything like that. That sort of stuff will really, really mess with Lilith. So make sure if you're taking Lilith and you're using her here that you have some sort of way of trying to maybe offset any of these effects that would be going on to your unit, rather than, like, again, say managing to debuff Immunit or something like that and then get off scot-free. That's what you're going to hope for, but certainly you're going to have to be worried about enemy applications on yourself. Taking a look at Lilith's passive skills here now, you guys can see she has Madness Enhancement EX. It's 12% Buster Performance. It's really interesting now. We see Madness Enhancement EX not on the actual Buster Berserkers too often, but instead on the actual, like, units that are way more like non-Buster centric. So basically certain Berserker units that end up having Madness Enhancement usually have a tendency to not be Buster themselves, because I think they know giving the Madness Enhancement EX is just really strong. Not only is that going to impact the NP if they're a Buster unit, but it's also going to impact the carding. In Lilith's case, this just impacts her singular Buster card. Be great for Mighty Chains and stuff like that, or again, when you just really need some high octane power, particularly if you're running Summer Scotty there alongside of her. But only having the one Buster card is going to be a downside for something like this. She also is going to have Divinity B. This is just going to add 175 flat damage to her attacks. So it's nice, it's easy, but nothing too much to write home about. And then she gets a unique one here, Hatred C. This increases her own damage against living human enemies by 10%. So it is just a flat 10% modifier right there. Just basically a power mod coming in against anybody that is living human. Now, obviously, that's not a huge niche of people, but certainly if you can take advantage of it, it's just extra damage that she is going to be able to do. And it's definitely an interesting one to include, given how high octane her kit kind of already was. Taking a look at her append skills here, obviously you guys know the normal gist of things. Something like mana loading could certainly be really, really nice with her, but keep in mind a lot of quick units have a tendency to function really well with block 50 charges. She herself has 50% charge. The mana loading might lose a little bit of value depending on the scenarios that you're running her in, especially since Scotty herself usually has 50% charge to confer. She does have an anti-ruler critical attack chance resistance. To me, again, Berserkers having the third append, you just almost never want to go for it. It's usually not going to be that worth it. You'd have to specifically be taking her against rulers a bunch and getting into knockdown, drag out situations, which frankly is not where Lilith wants to live. She really wants to be in a scenario in which she can one-shot people or very quickly dispose of them with multiple NPs, not necessarily in a scenario where you're going to have to sit down and survive, because you might just get carded out. You might get killed pretty easily, because again, Quick is not necessarily known for its survivability as a system. Though there's definitely stuff you can do for that in order to help keep her alive. But still, I digress. I'm going to say the third append here, really not worth your time for the majority of things. The fourth append, on the meantime, is going to grant you critical damage up. So definitely some value there. And skill reloading, if you do happen to find yourself in those longer form scenarios and you like using Lilith a lot, that's where something like this is really going to come in. You do have the makings for the capability to get quick units down in terms of their cooldown faster, but usually it's not a like actual support comp like you would have, say, with a Tamamo or a Koyanskaya type setup. So it's up to you if you want to go after this. To me, none of her appends really truly speak to me that much, other than maybe the extra attack or the special attack finesse, but up to you guys to decide. I think the choice is yours. Her noble phantasm is where things definitely get interesting for her. She has a 9-hit single target quick NP. And now that might sound like that's a ton of hits on the NP, but keep in mind she has a naturally low NP gain rate, and she really only has the 30% quick up to help this. She doesn't have NP gain. She doesn't really have anything else, so she's just going to have that 50% charge to help bail her out in the scenario that her NP doesn't generate that much. But as you guys can see from here, she has two niches, both lawful and good alignment, an extra 30% power mod for each. These can double stack, so you can definitely basically overlap them and get even more damage, but it's also because it's a power mod and not super effective, this will impact parting damage after the NP as well, since it has the 1 turn duration. From here, she'll deal damage to that one enemy, then she will inflict them with poison and curse for 1000 damage for 3 turns each, and from there decrease their defense by 20% for 3 turns. The subsequent NPs and carding against that enemy will definitely go harder. But interestingly enough here, she also then inflicts them with chaotic alignment and evil alignment. Just to be clear here, this basically puts the alignment on them. So regardless of whatever alignment they were before, they now also have this one in addition. Again, to understand that, this means this does not change the enemy's alignment. It adds another alignment to them, which is really peculiar because it does allow you the capability of exploiting this. This is why I said maybe utilizing her as a setup person for someone like, say, in the case of Chaotic, ironically enough, Zerctoria, or you could set up, say, in the case of Evil, someone like Estrella to be able to pop off against any of those enemies after the fact. So it is a really, really interesting thing in that regard, that it actually can be used to set up another unit rather than just naturally for herself. But like I said, this is going to be probably a rare thing. I think you're going to see most people use it just for the damage output. But we can't talk about Lilith's MP without talking about her overcharge effect. As you guys can see, she deals extra damage to enemies that are charm status, an additional 150% modifier. This is a super effective modifier. What that means is that this is going to deal basically extra damage on the Noble Phantasm. And that damage type, that category, is multiplicative with every other form of modifier that she could be buffed with. Super effective modifiers stand alone in the fact that they only impact the NP, and thus they are multiplicative with every other source of damage up that you could provide. So it's really, really a good thing for her here, especially given the fact that she can basically make an enemy have this actual super effective status for her. So the ability to charm debuff an enemy within her own kit and it having a high percentage chance of succeeding is really, really strong. And like we mentioned earlier, there are other ways that you guys can do things to set it up to make sure that she still gets this. Now, talking about her here, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention at least the possibilities for her craft essences. Now, obviously, due to the fact that she has Info and Pierce, we don't need to take a craft essence for something like that. To me, Black Grail is going to be how you're going to get the most one-shot damage out of her. There are other alternatives to it if you don't have it at MLB, including now the 5-star Berserker specific form that will work on Lilith. So definitely, if you have that one MLB, it can be a decent substitute. But it is still the strongest one of its category, so anything like it obviously can be used. But Black Grail is going to be how you're going to be able to achieve the maximum amount of NP damage up. Knights of Marines is going to be another decent one if you want to be able to loop her for multiple turns. Again, this one can also be used for something like a multiple damage dealer setup. You try to maybe use a 50% CE in something like that. But hey, the choice is yours. And maybe in pairing with this, something like the mana loading would go a lot better. So again, it's up to you to determine how you wish to use her and set her up. But these were the two craft essence that I felt like really did a good job for someone like her. Now, let's go ahead and let's talk about Lilith's actual like charge scenarios and numbers here. So basically, on screen, you can see we have her actual like refund depicted, but we also have a proper 3-turn setup for her. Now, this is going to use a 60% CE. Knights of Marines was our recommendation, but technically any other CE here could work. Also, her maxed out mana loading append. Who we're going to be pairing alongside with her is going to be double Summer Scotty and Oberon. And we're actually going to start with one of the Oberons in the party turn 1 rather than both the Scotties. So naturally, you're going to do one of the Scotties buffs. You're basically going to have her at 80%. So you're going to go ahead and pop her own steroid, but make sure you don't pop the 3rd skill. From there, we're going to go ahead and use Oberon's first skill. That's going to be 20% to bring him up to full, or bring her up to full. And then that should be enough to fire off the first MP with only one of the Scotty's buffs. From there, go ahead. You'll refund only like 6%, 7% there. It's not going to be a whole lot. That's going to be the biggest issue with someone like Lilith. So now in turn 2 here, we're going to need Lilith's 3rd skill. This is going to be her 30% attack up and 50% charge, as well as the first Scotty's 50% charge. You're going to rotate that Scotty with the plug suit, bring in the other Summer Scotty, and then have her pop all of her buffs on them, just saving her charge for later. That should be enough to bring her up to full. Go ahead and fire off the NP, and this time she will refund about 9% if you're lucky. Any amount of overkill hits should help that out, but that should be at least enough for 10% charge. Still, it's not going to matter too much in this scenario. We're basically going to go ahead and use the remaining Oberon buffs and the remaining Scotty charge to bring Lilith up to full, and then allow her to NP one final time in order to complete the 3-turn loop with Lilith. Now, talking about those refund scenarios, as we mentioned before, you guys can see on screen here, this is basically going to be her actual refund numbers here. We have different setups here, all of them really here with double Summer Scotty, but we have an all class, a assassin class, and a berserker class, because that's essentially the order of like refund importance here that you're going to see. So in the case of like all classes, aka like your knight classes that just have 1.0 modifiers and such, you're gonna see here it's basically gonna take 3 out of 8 overkill hits to get an even 10% pretty much. But I'm gonna tell you, at like maybe 1 to 2 overkill hits, you might be able to like squeeze in, depending on what other modifiers you have, enough for 10% refund. The issue at play here is, again, Scotty's system really doesn't like anything other than like 50% charge increments and stuff. So you can see this is the issue that actually does hold Lilith back. Her refund is, objectively speaking, crap. And that is basically the one way in which the devs actually hamstrung her. Otherwise, she's off to the races, as we'll talk about damage here in a minute. Things do get slightly worse here for the Assassin and Berserker amounts, but it really doesn't matter too much, because already this is such a low amount that it's almost like unreliable in that regard. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, but I wouldn't necessarily rely too much on Lilith's refund. Taking a look at Lilith's self-damage numbers now, this is not including anything externally for, like, say, support units, mystic codes, craft essences, you name it. This is just her under her own power in a neutral damage scenario, of which, as Berserker, Lilith is basically never neutral, maybe against a shielder, right? Which is interesting, because even in that scenario, she would have a little bit more damage. But taking a look at this, you guys can see her self-damage numbers are actually pretty darn decent here. And then basically the ability to stack her her power mods here on her NP, 30% each. It's definitely adding up in terms of the numbers. But what actually makes the bigger change here is the super effective charm modifier. So having the synergy to be able to multiply here with super effective and a power mod or two really opens things up for Lilith. and really makes the damage just skyrocket for her. Again, this is just under her own power, so these numbers are actually pretty darn impressive. She also does have the living humans modifier. It adds an additional flat 10% basically, as we mentioned before. So just kind of taking a look at the bottom numbers here, you guys can see it's going to jump them a little bit more. Just don't rely on living human too often because it's not a super common niche. Now, taking a look at her actual damage numbers in relation to her in an actual comp, we have a ton of scenarios here. But basically, the way this image is going to work is, as you guys can see, we have the left side over here indicating NP1 and the right side indicating NP2. The left side here with NP1 is what we're primarily going to look at. But you guys can see we have basically 3-turn environment scenarios here on top, and then one-shot numbers on bottom. So taking a look right here at the beginning, we have double Summer Scotty and Oberon with a level 100 Knights of Marines and a Neo Plug suit. This is going to put her at about 400k at NP1 by Wave 3 with the Oberon spike. Honestly, Wave 1 and Wave 2 are actually pretty respectable. They don't just fall off the grid or anything like that with some units. And it's definitely interesting to see that the power mods are obviously going to have the same effect. They're going to keep increasing the numbers for her, as well as the super effective and combination of the power mods. So definitely, I really like Lilith's damage capacity and scalability in terms of what she can do. The living human enemy one, again, same deal, just adding 10% across the board. But as you guys can see, she's just going to keep getting stronger as things go on in that regard. Looking at Lilith here now with one-shot numbers, you guys can see we actually have one-turn damage at about 700k without anything else coming into play. Starting to add in the power mods makes things strong. The super effective, you're already knocking on the door to 1 million right there. And quite literally, you've got pretty insane scalability here just at NP1 damage numbers in the right team setup against the right enemy. So I really think that she has some insane damage potential due to the capability of basically using her with Black Grail here. Same thing, living human numbers are going to get even stronger. And then obviously NP2 numbers, things just skyrocket even more. As you guys know, getting that second copy really going to extend the reach that a unit can kind of have with their damage capacity. So I really do think Lilith has some insane potential. But how does she stack up against some of her competition? Well, one of the big ones that we can definitely look at is somebody that recently got a buff of her own, and that's going to be Melt. Now, remember, Melt, like Lilith in a lot of scenarios, is only going to have a 1.5 times modifier. And that's the other takeaway there. Those Lilith numbers were neutral. So considering that sort of thing, you start to see some pretty insane capability. But even with someone like Melt here, Melt was already ridiculously strong. Even her one-shot damage isn't going to be as strong as someone like Lilith with those power modifiers. You guys can see just why everybody's kind of buzzing about Lilith at this point. It's obvious that not only do they like her from a character perspective, but damage capacity, it is pretty insane capability. Now, the elephant in the room that we already mentioned at the beginning of the recording here is going to be Summer Castoria, aka Castoria Berserker, or Zerktoria as I like to call her. She is definitely been somebody that when she releases is just insane damage capability, and actually kind of pound for pound, she does at least have the capability of out kind of shining Lilith depending on the scenario at play. They actually do have some interesting sort of synergy together, as we mentioned before, because Lilith can actually confer chaotic to an enemy, and Summer Castoria can exploit chaotic against an enemy. So there is some interesting capability to use them both at the same time, but they're both two single target berserkers. Summer Castoria here is basically going to be arts to her quick, so depending on the type of carding you want to use or go for, it's up to you to decide which one of these ends up remaining better. but I do think they're actually pretty much in parity, with maybe a little bit of extra damage favoring Summer Castoria. But naturally, I think the super effective modifier is going to be a lot harder to pull off on someone like Castoria. She requires threat to humanity. It's not a super common niche, as opposed to Lilith having easy access to charm, being able to put that on just about anybody unless they're immune. So Lilith is going to have probably more frequent high-end scalability compared to Summer Castoria. It's still really just going to come down to what the enemies have, which sort of like modifiers you can use against them, and that's going to really determine who's going to do the most damage in those scenarios. But yes, it is pretty interesting to see that there's a slight damage edge to Castoria, but Lilith will probably be able to hit her niches a little bit more than Castoria. Next up here, we have Draco for the damage comparison, and in a very similar thing here, you guys know Draco has not only the 7 Knights class like modifier, but also the servant modifier there going on. And you can see Draco actually still really holding her own in terms of damage capability. I'm sure a lot of people would have thought like, oh my god, no, like base damage, surely Draco falls way behind. No, Draco's still a pretty cracked unit despite what people like to say about her nowadays. And interestingly enough, she does still have her uses pretty much as long as you're not fighting that extra class type enemy. So that's really going to be Draco's wheelhouse. And to a degree, there's a lot of overlap there with Berserkers. It's not going to cover the extra classes like Berserkers might, but it is going to have a lot of capability to at least cover the 7 Knight classes like her niche kind of implies. So in that regard, Draco's still a very, very capable and comparable unit here. You can see she's also going to have the advantage of Black Grail. So that's what's really kind of keeping her in the mix. If Lilith had the ability to 3-turn with Black Grail, things would get really disgusting in a hurry. So like I said, it's pretty much the one thing that held Lilith back. And as you look at Draco's one-shot damage potential, not quite the same ability to scale as high, but again, a similar scenario to Lilith in the fact that she should be able to exploit her super effective modifier pretty easily on a lot of people. So similar kind of deal, just not as much scalability. And another interesting one here to compare to is going to be Kentoki. Kentoki definitely, at least in terms of raw power, also holding his own here. He does have the capability to tap into the man niche thanks to Koyanskaya, but doesn't really have any niches to call his own. So at this point, I hate to say it, Kentoki's kind of left behind by a lot of the stuff, and it's really going to require him having multiple MP levels to outshine some of these newer Berserkers. I feel bad for my bros out there, the golden bros, that basically, like, again, Kentoki still got quite a bit of punch in his kit, but the issue at play here is that he just fails in the scalability department compared to some of the other ones. So to me, in a weird way, I think we can almost see another buff for Kentoki at some point in the future. And ironically enough, with as much buffs as MHXA has had, her raw damage is where she actually suffers the most. She falls significantly behind the other options that we've displayed here. What she does have, though, is the good niche, which is fairly common, and the saber niche, and the ability to stack both. She does have quite a bit of scalability, but she doesn't have any charge, and a lot of what's really holding her back is the fact that she's going to be sitting here using a K-scope to the Black Grail and even, like, say, Knights of Marines that Lilith can use. So she's not getting any extra firepower out of something like this, and it's definitely something that she needs in order to be able to 3-turn. So to me, one of the best ways that could actually help MHXA, ironically enough at this point, would be to give her charge. So we'll just have to see what they do. Her one-shot damage, though, definitely showing that damage potential here, as it's pretty damn insane. Arguably the most insane out of all the units here at NP1, just due to the fact that, yeah, you suddenly give a unit that had to use K-scope and was balanced around at Black Grail, and that unit starts to pop off. So it is what it is. But yes, MHXA has definitely come a long way in that regard. So how do you guys feel about Lilith? Will you guys be rolling for her? Will this maybe change your opinion on Zerktoria in the future on NA? I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. Let me know what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Check me out live on Twitch and YouTube, obviously. and I will see you guys for the next one. Later.